for this adult ed session that we have. We are very honored today. As you know, we've been kind of advertising this a bit to have Dr. John Haught. I guess his friends call him Jack. Do I understand that right, Jack? Okay. And with us today on a very thought-provoking topic that he's going to address us with some of his ideas and thoughts. He's got his PhD from the Catholic University of America in 1970. He's a professor, emeritus professor of theology at Georgetown University as well, and has specialized throughout his life and at Georgetown in the coupling of science and theology between the two, and particular interest in cosmology, biology. He's going to talk a little bit today also about, God after Einstein and God after Darwin. I'll just add that into it in terms of the evolution. How do all of those wash with our understanding, if you will, and enhancing our understanding of theology and our belief in God? So very much looking forward to his presentation today and his engagement with this group. As I think many of you know, we have our science and religion group here at the Potomac Presbyterian Church. I was reminiscing a little bit with John that we have read 3 of his books already and are reading his 4th book, God After Einstein, right now. We had our first session this past month, a few weeks ago, on that. So again, we're all in great anticipation, and thank you so much, John, for joining us. I want to open in a brief prayer. Heavenly Father, thanking you for bringing us together this day as we think about you, and we also are grateful for the blessings that you have given all of us, both as a faith community as well as our individual families. And we also thank you so much for bringing John to us as we stretch our thoughts with our faith and enhance our faith with you through John and his discussion with us this morning. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. Amen. So without any further ado, John, the floor is yours.
I hope you can hear me okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Bob, for that nice introduction. I see you've already been anticipating my talk. So anyway, several years ago, I wrote a book, a couple of years ago, I wrote a book on Teilhard and another one more recently on Einstein. So what I've been toying with lately is the idea of imagining a kind of conversation between these two giants of science and faith. What would they have said to each other? It's a conversation that never took place, but it could have, because both of them, exiles from Europe, were living just miles from each other. Teilhard de Chardin, who was born in 1881, died in 1955, only days apart from the death of Albert Einstein. Teilhard was at the American Museum of Natural History when he died. Einstein was at Princeton at the Institute for Advanced Studies. And so they could have talked. So I've been trying to imagine what a conversation between them might look like. And I'll be the kind of moderator of this conversation. And first I'll have to introduce our 2 partners in conversation. As everybody knows, Einstein was the greatest scientist of our age, and he was great because of his theory, primarily his theory of general relativity, which was a theory of gravity, which changed our whole understanding, transformed our whole understanding of the universe, at least for those who dared to look at what he was saying. It's revolutionary, and it's especially interesting theologically. To me, the most important thing that Einstein gave us was the idea that we can no longer separate time from matter. And that's different from the way in which most people have thought. For most of intellectual history in the West, at least, time, like space, was just a container into which God poured the content of creation. So it was sort of already there. And time was not integrated or associated deeply with matter itself, I don't think, until Einstein, although it started with Darwin in a way, who built life or time into a whole story of life. So what the integration of time with matter does is, for the first time, it allows the universe to be a story. Whereas previously it had been a place into which humans were plopped, so we do our thing, and then if we were good, we could transmigrate to another world, a timeless world, as it were. But once we allow the universe to be a story, and it was primarily Teilhard who would have pointed out in this conversation to Einstein, it was your theory that made possible one of the great events, the greatest discovery of modern science, according to Teilhard, we'll see, is that the universe was a story. And Einstein's mathematics was essential to that. But ironically, Einstein himself did not care much for time. In fact, he thought that our sense of the passage of time from past to present to future is a psychological impression, an illusion. And that time is really just a fourth geometric dimension of space-time. So he didn't think of time as flowing the way other thinkers had, including Henri Bergson, one of Teilhard's heroes, who also engaged in public debates with Einstein over the nature of time. But for Einstein, time was never very important. Eternity was. What Einstein did, and this he thought made him just like so many other religious people in the history of faith, it made him realize that he himself, that Einstein was more attracted to eternity than to time, because time is cruel. Time leads to perishing. And so eternity is there to rescue us from time. But Einstein did not cozy up to eternity by way of prayer or hope, but by way of geometry. So geometry was almost like a sacred science to him, because it puts us in touch with timeless forms, numbers, and principles that time itself obscures. And so for him, I can imagine him going into his study every day, closing the door as he always did behind him, and kind of bathing himself in the security of timeless numbers and forms. And that was a religious experience for him, a deeply religious one. As he himself said, he never liked to be called an atheist, like a lot of Christians called him, because he thought that made him seem like he was not deeply pious and deeply devoted to something eternal and something worth living for. He found eternity worth living for. But like many Christians in history, he was also willing to disengage himself somewhat from time, or at least he tried to do so. It's impossible, but he tried. So he had no need, he said, for the personal consolation of the God of Abraham, the prophets, and Jesus. The eternal timelessness of numbers and forms and ideals was enough to give him security and consolation and happiness in his life. So the universe for him was impersonal, but reliable, something we could take consolation from, as long as we look beneath the surface of time through the eternal figures and numbers and ideals beneath the surface. So I guess you might dub his spirituality a spirituality of contemplation. And he's very Platonic in his spirituality, like a lot of Christians have been over the centuries. Teilhard was a Jesuit priest, a geologist, paleontologist, and therefore an evolutionist by profession. And being an evolutionist, he wanted to make sure that he integrated his faith with what he was learning through his science. So he started writing papers, presenting his ideas to friends. They were circulated in mimeograph form. So his superiors got hold of some of these and thought his ideas were just too dangerous for the time. So what they did is ask him, actually sent him to China where he lived for 25 years. I like to say that's sending a geologist to a place where he likes to dig up old bones and fossils. So he was very happy with that in a way. But at the same time, he was always unhappy that he was not there back in Europe conversing with others about his ideas, about what sciences of evolution and geology, and especially cosmology, imply. So while he was in China, he developed a sterling scientific reputation, becoming one of the top 2 or 3 geologists of the Asian continent while he was there. His scientific peers and friends always deeply respected him. He wrote hundreds of scientific papers. He knew what science was, and that he never imported his theology or his religion into his scientific papers. While he was there in China, he still had his religious ideas. So he started writing voluminously on how one might integrate faith and science. And particularly, his most important work was called The Phenomenon of Man, now translated in a good translation as the human phenomenon. But his superiors and the Vatican eventually would not let him publish this book in his own lifetime. So he came to another kind of exile in New York and was living there when he died in 1955, still writing religious essays and religious books, which his friends, his lay friends, got together and sent to hungry publishers after he died. And as a result, he had a tremendous influence on religious thought, especially back in the 60s and 70s, including shaping some of the documents of the Second Vatican Council. It's kind of ironic because in 1962, the Holy Office, as it was called, issued a monitum, or a warning, to seminary professors and to presidents of Catholic colleges at the university not to expose their students to the dangerous ideas of Teilhard de Chardin. But after he died, his dangerous ideas are peppered throughout, especially the document on the church in the modern world. So he got his revenge that way, I suppose. Anyway, he learned to look at everything, including God and humanity and the whole universe, in terms of what he called cosmogenesis. And he got this from Einstein, even though Einstein himself did not believe in cosmogenesis until perhaps later in his life. Cosmogenesis means the becoming of the cosmos. Teilhard encouraged his friends and his students always get into their bones, into their brains, into every pore of their being, the fact that we live in a universe that is unfinished, that's still coming into being, and that therefore has a future which we did not see for centuries. So this is the revolutionary aspect of his thought, I think, primarily, to see the universe as still imperfected, and as never having been perfected. We'll see why in a moment. And that makes a difference, he thought, in our ethical life. That in order to have passion in our action, our efforts, in our moral life, in our work life, and whatever, we have to have a sense that there's still room for more being, for fuller being, for something that had never been before. And he thought that the ideas he had inherited from his faith, especially the idea of eternity, kind of put a lid on the whole human effort to create something new. So he wanted to rethink the idea of God, and as it turned out, Einstein helped him do that, even though that was not Einstein's intention. So the difference then, to say it immediately, between Einstein and Teilhard is that Einstein is still into a spirituality of contemplation that goes back especially to Plato, and that has been idealized and changed and transformed in many contemporary versions of spirituality, which are still basically Platonic, at least as Teilhard would see it. Whereas what Teilhard wanted Christian spirituality or spirituality of the earth to be like is, you say, spirituality of anticipation, a sense that something new is coming from up ahead. So if I were moderating a conversation between these two gentlemen, I would ask them, what gets you up in the morning? What gives meaning and passion to your life? And Einstein would have immediately replied, it's the rapturous amazement of the harmony of natural law, which reveals an intelligence of such superiority that compared with it, all the systematic thinking and acting of human beings is an utterly insignificant reflection. It is beyond question closely akin to that which has possessed the religious geniuses of all ages, a sense of the eternal and the sense of the imperfection of time, and therefore the need to get in touch with eternity to solve the problem of perishing that occurs if we tie ourselves too closely to time. Whereas Teilhard would answer quite differently. The only thing that keeps me youthful and active, that gives him, he often called it a zest for living, is the growing belief that there is something immense, something beautiful about to take place throughout the world. He means in the future of the universe. And that we must abandon ourselves to the mighty current, this anticipatory current that has been running through nature since day one. Abandon ourselves to this mighty current of development. So to sum up for them, the spiritual life for Einstein is being carried out of time and awakening to the timeless mystery of the universe's geometric comprehensibility. Whereas for Teilhard, the spiritual life consists of being carried forward by time into the immensity and beauty of the future, to cultivate a sense of belonging to a universe that is still becoming new, more, and fuller. And Teilhard eventually said, I won't be able to go into his ethics in detail today, but it's a sense of becoming new, more, and fuller that gives the zest for living that energizes authentic moral existence as well. And he's departing there from those moralists who, like Immanuel Kant, who thought of God as planting a sense of duty in our hearts. Teilhard would not reject that idea, but he would say it comes, the sense of duty comes through our participation in this wonderful story that Einstein has helped us discover, but that Einstein himself did not really see. So Einstein would say to Teilhard, after listening to this, I don't see the cosmos going anywhere. In fact, there can be, for Einstein, no real increase in the universe. Timeless geometry is enough. Its beauty and reality should fill us with religious meaning. So what we have to do is learn to become geometers, either literally or figuratively, and get in touch with that dimension of eternity that lies beneath and beyond the temporal world. And Teilhard would ask him, do you believe in God? And Einstein would say, I believe in Spinoza's God. Spinoza was a modern philosopher who lived in the 17th century after Descartes, and who thought that nature and God are identical. And this is called pantheism. And Einstein, starting as a young man, was attracted to a kind of pantheist view of things, primarily because it allows nature to be eternal. In pantheism, God and nature are two names for the same thing. So if God means, as it did from long ago, something eternal, something necessary, something that cannot not be, if that's what God means, and if now nature is identified with God, then nature cannot not be. Nature cannot be something created. Nature has to be deity itself in a way. So pantheism has been appealing to many, many religious people for the same reason that eternity is appealing to Einstein. It allows us to feel that our lives are encircled by something that will not fade. And that's a genuine religious longing in people. So pantheism does respond to a deep religious longing in people. But nature now is capable of being looked upon as eternal and necessary. The universe, therefore, is fundamentally finished. This was Einstein's early thinking, and it was still his thinking even after he formulated his theory of general relativity. So he would say to Teilhard, your idea of a personal God is objectionable primarily because it's incompatible with what I believe to be scientific truth or scientific method. Nature, for Einstein, as it has been for many and still is for many scientists today, a closed continuum of cause and effect relationships, which nothing can disturb. The laws of science are working with absolute fidelity, never to be broken. That's an idea that still serves as great consolation to many intellectuals, to many people in the scientific community. A personal God, to be known as such, would have to interrupt the closed continuum of cause and effect relationships. And that would amount to the end of science. A responsive God, a God who cares, a God who loves, a God who intervenes, who comes down and hears the cry of God's people and redeems them, doesn't make any sense. Because such a God would violate, by divine action, the fundamental principles that hold the universe together. And those are the eternal principles of geometry, of timelessness. Consequently, there's no reason to pray. Prayer has no place in genuine religion, according to Einstein. He would probably agree with the satirical writer Ambrose Bierce in his Devil's Dictionary. He defined prayer as asking that the laws of the universe be annulled in behalf of a single petitioner, confessedly unworthy. That's how ridiculous prayer still seems to many scientifically educated people. If prayer works, then science doesn't. And that's still a big conflict. So Teilhard has to deal with that issue in his conversation. But let's let Einstein continue. Not only is there no room for divine action without disturbing the whole sacred thing we call science, there's no room for freedom as we usually understand it either. Human freedom, if it were true, if it were real, would also interrupt the closed continuum of nature. Nature is deterministic, operates according to inviolable scientific laws from all eternity. So nothing can disturb that without disturbing the religious consciousness of people like Einstein. He says at one point, I do not at all believe in human freedom in the philosophical sense. Everybody acts not only under external compulsion, but also in accordance with inner necessity. The brains and molecules are the atoms and molecules in our brains run according to deterministic circles or circuits. Einstein never accepted the idea of quantum indeterminacy. The universe has to be run according to inviolable laws. So freedom is an illusion, just as the passage of time is an illusion. Everything is determined by forces over which we have no control. We all dance to a mysterious tune intoned in the distance by an invisible piper. And yet, just parenthetically, after Einstein was exiled from Germany and Europe in general and came to the United States, he would go around giving lectures to people on how they have to exercise their responsibility in resisting Nazism. And he gave powerful talks to that effect. But so he never really, as far as I know, reconciled his practical belief in freedom and responsibility with his theoretical understanding of absolute necessity. I've looked and looked in his writings, and I never saw anywhere where he actually attempted to reconcile the two. Furthermore, he would say to Christians, there's no room for the miracles of the Bible or for the resurrection of Christ, because that too would interrupt the closed continuum. It would break inviolable physical laws. I wish I had more time to talk about this, because another person that we could bring into this conversation is the German theologian Rudolf Bultmann, who also tried, like Teilhard, to reconcile faith with his deeply pious Lutheran religion. And Einstein said, Bultmann said, to do that, we can accept Einstein's view of nature. Yeah, nature is deterministic. There is no room for freedom in nature itself. But we have another reality that we humans belong to. We straddle the reality of nature, but also the reality of freedom. And freedom is just in opposition to nature. But if we have to accept our freedom, then we can redefine miracles to mean the miracle that transforms inauthentic existence into authentic existence. That faith is the only real miracle that we need to worry about. And that takes place internally in each of us rather than externally. So Bultmann, and he's had many followers since the 20th century, appeals to a lot of intellectuals in the Christian community, because it allows them to think that the only thing that matters is the relationship of my interior hidden subjectivity to God. And what God does is liberate me internally, and then I can spread the good news in my practical life that way. But God has no real relationship to nature in much Christian thought, because Christian theologians also have wrestled with this problem and concluded, pretty much like Einstein in a way, nature is deterministic, and but the real reality is apart from nature in us. I don't want to go into the ecological implications of that way of thinking, but they are disastrous. We have learned by this kind of theology to ignore the natural world because we can't do anything about it, as it were. And that's all because we haven't learned to situate ourselves in terms of the natural story. And this is what Teilhard tries to do. Teilhard tries to put us back into nature, but we have to change our understanding of nature from this deterministic Einsteinian way of looking at things if we're going to do that. And that'll take some doing. The timeless geometry of space-time, Einstein would say, forbids any exceptions. The universe is run well enough by aimless and impersonal laws, and therefore for Einstein, Christianity, if it really believes miracles and resurrection, that they are real, is irreconcilable with science also. So Teilhard would have trouble accepting this, and he would say to Einstein, I seek God not by escaping into eternity, but by participating in the world's becoming new, more, and fuller. And he means, by the world, he means the universe is always becoming new, more, and fuller. And Teilhard would say, I too am critical of any traditional spirituality that asks us to escape from time into some other world where time does not exist, into eternity. So the metaphysics of the eternal present God is something that Teilhard thinks we have to be critical of, because that notion of eternal present puts a lid on what we humans can do. It puts a lid on our freedom. It doesn't give us the freedom to accept our own lives. It doesn't give us the freedom to accept the universe as something distinct from God and not wrapped up in eternity. So he's very critical. And ironically, Einstein turns out to be closer to those religious superiors of Teilhard who condemned him for cozying up to time. That's not Christianity. But Teilhard would respond to them, yes, it is. That's the doctrine of the incarnation. The incarnation means, if it means anything, that God too embraces time. So why shouldn't we either? And this has been going on, this controversy has been going on since the early Christological councils, which were trying to sort out whether we can believe in a God who actually comes into time without that jeopardizing the eternity of God. And we're still, I would say, still wrestling with the same question. Christianity has never fully solved that issue. But Teilhard tried to do so, but he got squashed for doing it. He emphasized we have to get into our head the idea that if the universe is still coming into being, it too has a future that has never happened before, and that we can gain a sense of dignity from by participating in bringing it about. There's also, of course, the naturalistic temptation that in effect says, well, nature is all there is. But that's a dead end too for Teilhard. If nature is all there is, then we are in trouble. So to sustain our hopes, evolution and cosmic process in general must have an indestructible goal. And that goal is up ahead more than up above. And Teilhard refers to it as omega, the last letter in the Greek alphabet. And he admits, yes, the book of Revelation says God is Alpha and Omega, but Teilhard says God is more Omega than Alpha. And that's a major difference. So he invites us all as Christians and as scientists too, to embrace cosmogenesis, the fact that we live in a still becoming cosmos. It's not there yet. And he calls this the greatest discovery of modern science. But it's ironic that even Einstein did not see this. So the story of how we discovered that the cosmos is a story is almost as interesting as the story itself of how the cosmos came into being. The greatest discovery in modern science is that the universe is still coming into being. Not long after Einstein published the general theory of relativity, some mathematicians and physicists started poring over his equations to see if they could be interpreted in a different way from the way Einstein did by eternalizing time. And one of those mathematicians, in fact, one of the great mathematical or physical mathematicians of the 20th century, was a priest, a lay priest. He and Teilhard, I think, might have met once or twice. And his priesthood has absolutely nothing to do with what he found. When he looked over Einstein's equations, he found that they could be interpreted to mean that the cosmos had a beginning and has been developing over immense periods of time. It began as a primeval atom, which is still expanding, and therefore that the universe, since it's still expanding, is still coming into being. Einstein did not like this. Here he is together in a picture with Lemaitre. And so he went back to the drawing board and put into his equations what he called, and has been called since, the cosmological constant. And the cosmological constant is an anti-gravity factor. I mean, if the universe is eternal, as Einstein admitted, and if gravity says everything tugs on everything else, then by this time, the universe should be just one big solid mass, an undifferentiated mass. But if we look out through our telescopes and so forth, we see that matter is distributed lavishly throughout extravagant eons and epochs and spatial distances. And so it's nothing like that. So Einstein had to explain why these bodies are still apart. And he introduced into his equations an anti-gravity factor, which has been called the cosmological constant. There's still a lot of discussion of this, which we can't go into now, but what it meant for Einstein was that the universe is still eternal. It's not becoming, it's eternally the same. At the same time that Einstein was reworking his theory of relativity, Edwin Hubble and his staff at the Mount Wilson Observatory in California were observing that the light from some distant galaxies was shifting toward the red end of the spectrum, which meant that the waves coming there are elongated, and they can be elongated only compared with others because these bodies are moving away from the observer at incredible speed. And that's what makes the waves longer and show up as red. So what that meant, it's almost smoking gun evidence that the universe is expanding. So eventually Einstein got together with Lemaitre and Hubble in California, and he, at least in principle, had to agree, had to eat crow, as it were, and was happy to do so because science, he realizes, is successful. The sign of its success is when you can revise your scientific ideas. But still, I don't think he ever fully accepted the temporality of the universe. So in this top panel, the contemporary bodies, which we now know to be galaxies, Hubble did not know that, are spread out far from one another. What that would mean if the universe is still expanding is that earlier on, if you go back several billion years, these bodies were closer together. And if you go back further, they're even closer together. And if you go all the way back, they were all compressed into one initial object smaller than the nucleus of an atom, almost infinitely hot and infinitely dense, and it flared forth in what we now call the Big Bang universe. Now, most of the theological discussion of Einstein since the Big Bang theory was formulated has had to do with whether we need to think of God primarily in terms of a beginning of the cosmos, and therefore somehow backing up the stories of divine creation in the Bible. But did the story have a real beginning? A lot of scientists like Stephen Hawking would say, no, that wasn't really a beginning. But the thinking of theologians has been, both the Islamic theologians and Christians, is that anything that comes into existence can only have been brought into existence by the power of something that already exists. So it was an important question to ask, and still is, did the universe have a crisp beginning? And if it did, could we make any sense of it unless there is something that brought it into existence? And therefore, doesn't Big Bang cosmology support the idea of creation? Well, Teilhard was not nearly as excited about beginnings as a lot of his fellow scientists and his fellow Christians were. He thought that the real question, and much more interesting one, is not how it began, but where is it going? And what does that have to do with our lives? Why should that be of interest? Is it going toward a dead end, as many scientists agree that the principle of entropy, second law of thermodynamics, maintains that the amount of energy available to do work is constantly on the decrease. So entropy is a term that means the measure of the amount of energy no longer available to do work. And the pile of entropy seems to be growing. And so many scientific thinkers think, well, eventually, maybe trillions of years from now, there will be not enough energy in the universe to sustain life and brains, and that thought will somehow disappear. This was maintained in an article by Dennis Overby, a writer for the New York Times in the science section, about a year and a half ago. And he said this was the saddest thought he ever had, that eventually thought will vanish from the cosmos. Teilhard would agree that entropy exists, but the nice thing about entropy, we should be thankful for this, is entropy implies that the movement of time is irreversible. And that means that there is a genuine passage from past to present to the future. So time is real. It's not something imaginary, as Einstein wanted to believe. And once you agree that time is real, you can't help asking, where is it going? So what theology and what people of faith should be looking for in the universe and in their lives is, is there anticipatory evidence of something big coming from up ahead? I see that time is hitting here. So there's a lot more to be said, I can guarantee that, but I do not have time to say that. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Do you take questions?
Sure.
Yeah, I have a question.
Well, if you, oh, I'm sorry, I called.
Go ahead, Diane. You.
Go ahead.
Kathy.
Going back to Panera, if you believe life is an evolving story, the universe, then there's no guaranteed role for human beings in the future. And that is a direct conflict with religion, which traditionally views us as God's ultimate creation.
The way in which Teilhard would probably answer that question is that, yes, he agrees with the physicists that the universe could very well have a heat death in which the energy is no longer available. But in the meantime, a story has been going on that entropy has made possible. And he simply, as a Christian believer, thinks that story can be taken into the infinite, eternal compassion of God, transformed into great beauty, and therefore given a kind of indestructible quality to it, so that the lives of all of us are remembered along with the cosmic story. Our story is taken into the life of God. What that asks of us, though, and this is not something we might be used to, is that realizing that our own personal destiny cannot be separated from the destiny of the universe.
Yeah.
And that should make us happy. It should make us want to care for this place that we are part of.
It's interesting in view of all we're learning about AI.
Yes.
And
So
computers' ability.
So eagerly read Science magazine, read all the science you can. But it's all part of this story.
Yeah, I guess one of the things that comes to mind in the future as we continue to evolve, both life continues to evolve as well as the cosmos continues to evolve, as you said, is I'm curious about Teilhard, how he would view our belief in, from a personal point of view, life after death. Not necessarily resurrection of the body as we believe that Jesus went through in the Bible, but life after death for us, because for Christians often, I'll just speak for myself and probably others as well, I take great comfort and I can understand being part of the future, as you say, the story that will never be forgotten, will be in God's care in the future. But at the same time, I take great comfort in the fact that after death, in some conscious state or whatever, I would be unified with God. In fact, we celebrate that at memorial services of people that we lose. So my question is sort of is, what would his view be on that?
He was very Christian in that sense, and he was especially devoted to the Eucharist as a symbol of the whole universe becoming the body, taken into the body of the resurrected Christ. And so he wants to emphasize the fleshly aspects of our faith, and not just the immortality of the soul, but what is being saved is the whole cosmos, and it's being saved by virtue of the fact that while it's going down the drain entropically and physically, it has always been a story of ongoing awakening. So this metaphor of awakening takes care of your question, I think. But it's not just your soul that's awakening, it's the cosmos that's awakening. The cosmos awakened to life 3.8 billion years ago, and it eventually, very recently, awakened to thought in the form of human ability to experience, to think, to judge, and decide. That was a major breakthrough in cosmic awakening. And faith is a further step in the cosmos awakening to God. And if the cosmos is awakening to God, God is taking the cosmos into the divine life. And with the cosmos, he's taking our own individual lives with it. But the thing about science is that in light of astrophysics today, we now realize that my personal story doesn't start with my gestation in my mother's womb. It goes back to day one, 13.8 billion years ago, this cosmic story that's making possible even the physical conditions and fundamental constants that were put into place at point zero, the Big Bang, were structured in such a way as eventually to guarantee that the universe would continue to awaken. On Earth, we talk about life and consciousness, but in the billions of galaxies that we have now, you can't help but wondering how awakening takes place elsewhere. But in that awakening, it's not just myself, it's the whole universe, including my friends and neighbors and parents and so forth. That's all there, but it's much richer than we used to think when we thought only in terms of body and soul, you know. So,
Jack, can you repeat the question?
oh, I will.
Can you
The
repeat?
question was, what about us? What about me? In terms of my destiny. So, yeah.
And
Alex.
revisiting
I should do that. I'm sorry I didn't do that before.
Has the advent of the Webb telescope changed the discussion in any way?
It's does the advent of the Webb telescope change the discussion? Teilhard was fascinated and encouraged by the development of technology. He saw the development of technology as another essential ingredient for the awakening of consciousness. Just as before our own brains were able to make the leap into thought, the material, physical, molecular, biological processes had to be worked out over millions and millions of years so that that awakening could take place. Now he thought of the earth itself as analogous to the brain. And he's wondering whether the developments of technology, especially telescopes and other ways of complicating technology, how that contributes to the ongoing awakening of the universe. So in saying that, he gave meaning to the lives of engineers and others who think that, who wonder sometimes whether their work is worthwhile. And one of the things that's made him appealing to so many thoughtful people is that he does give a place to research. And if anything is part of research, it's the telescopes. So that's part of the cosmic awakening. And it's an adventure that we should all be happy about. It raises the question, which I can't go into now, awakening to what? That's the interesting theological question after Einstein. To what is the universe awakening? And what can our religious faiths contribute to that? And can't all religious faiths, in a sense, contribute to this awakening of the universe, so that instead of squabbling with one another about what is true and what isn't, couldn't we think of all the faiths as at least trying, not always successfully, since life is full of disastrous dead ends, but striving to awaken to something. And so the religious question today is, what is that to which the world is awakening? Christians have an answer for that, but other faiths have an answer for that as well.
What influence have these two great theologians and scientists, what impact have they had on your own personal belief?
And the question is, what do these two scientists and men of faith, what impact have they had on my own? Tremendous. I wouldn't be here today. When I was young, I was exposed in my early 20s to the writings of Teilhard, and they gave me an alternative way of being a Christian that I thought was completely compatible, especially with the Abrahamic strain in our traditions. Much Christianity lost touch with the Bible over the centuries and went more to Plato than to Abraham. In a way, for me, Teilhard's thought, and Einstein's too in his own way, reawakened a kind of Abrahamic faith that that the universe, not just humans, but the whole universe is seeded not with design, but with promise. So the theme of promise that's fundamental in biblical religion has been brought out, at least for me personally, especially by Teilhard and also by almost all other scientific thinkers, including Einstein. I mean, I can make a place for Einstein in my faith too. I mean, I think it's beautiful the way he was struggling for some way in which to reconcile his life and his work with reality. He did it in a way that's different from Teilhard's, but it's one that has a much more venerable pedigree, I suppose. And most of us have been more exposed to the Platonic than to the Abrahamic way of interpreting this awakening. But it allows me to bring the Bible back into my faith in a way that nothing else has been able to do.
Yeah, good story. So we're reading God After Einstein with our Presbyterian Association of Science, Technology, and Christian Faith group here in the church. And you write in that book, so the first 21 volumes in the 30-volume set are devoid of life. Sort of you give that example of that's when sort of humans came in, and the very late in the 21st volume.
Yeah.
But I was thinking, I wonder how you ended up with that 30 volumes. If we're in this ever expanding cosmos, extravagant span gives dramatic depth to the universe. So why did you give it 30 volumes?
I wanted to, this was by way of trying to get my students at Georgetown to realize the scale of cosmic time. And it used to be, when I first started teaching, that the universe was 15 billion years old, but it lost several billion years since then. So it's 13.8. This is almost accepted as scientific consensus today.
Right.
So what I did was suppose that you have 30 volumes. Each volume is 450 pages long, and each page is 1 million years in the story. So the first, as you mentioned, the first 21, 22 volumes are devoid of life and mind. And that makes scientific materialists think that life came in only as a fluke, and that mind, which comes in only on page 450 of volume 30, is a cosmic afterthought. And that most scientists and almost all philosophers today consider the existence of life to be completely unrelated to matter. And that mind, since it came in only at the bottom of page 450, is really not very important after all. So this picture has given scientists the sense that, well, life and consciousness do not matter that much. But what Teilhard does, and Einstein made this possible, is once you allow that the cosmos is a story of awakening, the awakening begins in volume 1 on page 1. So these gray volumes should be painted green. The universe was always going to give rise to life somewhere along the way, and it was always going to awaken into consciousness somewhere along the way.
So there are more volumes, though.
That's right.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay.
30
Right,
volumes.
right. I was just-
The 30
okay.
volumes are only the dawn, perhaps,
Right.
of the
Okay.
story. Yeah.
Okay. That's
And-
helpful.
And that's really a Teilhardian idea. We are part of an awakening, a drama of awakening.
Right.
That should give meaning to our lives.
Well, it's going on for a long time, and it will more. But aside from the length of the universe time, that calculations now, what we understand of astronomy seems to be that our sun will burn out of helium in we're about 80% through the time that our sun will do that, and then when it flares up with that implosion and all that will pretty much burned off all the water in this hunk of rock.
Yeah, everything is extinguishable here in the deep time.
Yeah.
But that's
pretty
why-
rough, but
That's why I come back again to the fact that even though the story will end, it will always be true that the story has taken place. It will always be true forever that you and I were here in Potomac, Maryland on October 20th, whatever.
pretty sure
And
that's true.
that truth will never perish. We will perish, but the story will still be there. And so what theology adds, what faith adds, is that there is some compassion at the heart of things or at the end of things that embraces every bit of the story and holds it in eternal or everlasting existence in the mind of God. But this God too is someone who allows the divine life to be filled with content of this story. So not just Teilhard, but other theologians, especially a group of theologians called process theologians who embraced ideas of Alfred North Whitehead and Charles Hartshorne, have entered into the discussion and have dealt with the question of, well, everything in the universe is perishable in time, but the story can be, in a sense, disengaged from the physical substratum in which it took place. So it will always be true that the universe story existed and our stories along with it. Then the question becomes, Charles Hartshorne asked this question, but I think Teilhard does too, where will it be true? Trillions of years from now, that this story took place. Where will it be true? Where will this truth be deposited, as it were? And it's an answer to that question, and it's not science does not help us there. But this is where Teilhard would agree that faith is essential to the awakening of the cosmos, and therefore this part of living in an unfinished universe is that why life struggles, why we are uncertain, why we have to walk by faith and not by sight, why our religions are so imperfect, why our theologies and lectures on theology are so inconclusive and inadequate. It's all because we live in a universe that is not yet perfected. And if it's not yet perfected, it has a dark side to it. And it's in that dark side of an incomplete universe that evil can gain a foothold, that faithlessness and despair can gain a foothold. So then the question becomes, well, why would a good God create a universe that is unfinished? Why not complete it on day one or moment one? Why not an immediately completed creation? Which actually Christians did believe in and still do in many ways. Teilhard would say that the notion of an initially completed creation is theologically inconceivable. Try to imagine a creator in the beginning creating a perfectly rounded off creation. Such a creation would have no future because it's already complete. It would allow for no freedom because everything will have been fixed, like Einstein wanted, into its eternal place. This is Einstein's way of looking at things. And this is what Teilhard cannot accept, this theology that everything was created perfectly and that everything is in reality fully finished. If that were true, there would be no room for life, because life requires the indeterminacy of the future into which its striving can take place. There would be no need for almost all the things that give us our sense of dignity, especially our freedom, if it were a perfectly finished creation in the beginning. That's not a satisfactory answer because we still have the question, which what should we be doing with our lives? But this is where he says, think of the fact that the universe has always been a story of awakening. That's reason enough to risk hoping that it will continue to awaken in the future. But that's faith. But faith is the way in which the universe, now that it has become conscious of itself in us, opens itself to further awakening. So faith is important for the understanding the universe. The universe needs faith, not just we, but the cosmos needs faith for its further awakening.
I want to just say, I think you've opened us up to further awakening on this topic. This has been really a gift to us today, Dr. Haught. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to sort of try to honor our time and honor your time. And we'll just say a real thank you to